So, Shaheen, in your opinion, how do you find the right writers to create thought leadership content, which is the $1 million question of today's interview, I think.
Yeah, so I think just as you alluded to, like there's this kind of like problem where you have people who are really expert
hmm
in their subject, but they're not good at writing, and then you have people who are really good at writing and maybe don't know anything about the subject. And I
hmm
think a lot of times content marketers, content marketing teams are looking for just these perfect people that are really difficult profiles to find that have both things.
hmm
And I think, well, obviously, if someone is a thought leader and an excellent writer, they probably already have a platform and they're probably difficult to access.
Right.
So that's why, I mean, I think if you have to choose between one thing or the other,
hmm
the more important thing is to work with great writers, because a great writer can always learn new topics.
hmm
And as personally, as someone with the background in journalism, I have a lot of experience of like always having to write about different things. Like when you're a journalist, you're
hmm
um, constantly just writing about whatever the news is in
hmm
your subject area. But like every time, it's a completely new learning curve, and you have to
Of
talk
course.
to others, source the information from them, and then put that
hmm
into an article that is accessible for like a reader who maybe doesn't have the same level of expertise as the people you're interviewing.
Exactly.
So I think the concepts of journalism definitely should be applied in content marketing, and
hmm
in the same way, yeah, journalists can't be experts in everything they write about. Neither
hmm
can someone who does writing
hmm
for a company blog, for example.
hmm Now, I
So
wanted to just like kind of going on that, like in another episode that we've done, we talked about how your journalistic experience like impacted our company, like VeraContent and what it is. And I think it's interesting because one of our core values is like relentless curiosity. And I think like we chose that. I got to be part of that experience too, like it helping with the core values. So we got to do a lot of brainstorming, and I think we chose that one, and it really like reflects this topic well because I think we have a lot of great writers, but like you need to be relentlessly curious in order to learn about new topics and the different clients that we work with, and it's part of our day-to-day job. So I think like that's such a big part. Like a good writer is relentlessly curious, and they're going to be able to learn new things and then apply their great writing skills to the content they produce. So,
yeah, absolutely, it's a great point.
mhm.
Totally agree. Yeah, and that is like totally the spirit of that value. And it's
Mhm.
like we only want to work with people who are really going to dig into the topic and truly understand it. Like
Exactly.
we're not like looking to create superficial content.
hmm
So,
That's for sure.
yeah.
Now, I think it's also like worth mentioning a recent case study that we've done at VeraContent, and I am excited to talk about this a little bit because I had the experience of writing for this client and then also being the project manager for this client. And the client's called Redk, and they're a consulting firm that transforms organizations by optimizing sales, marketing, customer experience, and other processes with like really high-end technology tools such like Sugar CRM and Salesforce. And they were really, when they came to us, and we've been working with them for numerous years now, and they came to us because they're really looking for an agency that could help them produce high quality content, especially like with their special, not special, but very niche style and tone of voice. And a lot of the thought leadership work we're doing with them, we're writing on behalf of the CMO. So it really has to be high quality. And they were looking to invest a lot of their time and energy in like teaching an agency how to write about their topics. So that way it became like this, well greased content production engine or machine. And I think every year we produce about like over 100 blog posts for them. We've also done a lot of case studies, created in, I think 6 in total so far in English and in Spanish. And it has brought a lot of traffic to their website and has helped the blog in general become like one of the top 10 in the UK. And I think it's really interesting with this client because not only are we trying to, learn a new topic and become these thought leaders in this very, very niche field, but also we're doing it in 2 languages because Red K has headquarters in Madrid in Spain and also in London in the UK. So it's like bilingual content that we have to work in 2 different languages on a very niche topic. And I think in my experience, for example, I didn't know anything about the topic when I started writing for them, but I think I was a great writer, or at least I was very thorough with research, and I really wanted to learn about the topic. So it's definitely like an interesting case study. Definitely check it out on the website. I don't want to like shamelessly plug it, but I do think like because we did this case client story very recently for like about this client, we came up with this topic too. And I think it's very interesting that we like can refer to this throughout the today's interview.
Yeah, so like maybe you could talk about like the kinds of topics that we typically write about for RedK, because I know, like you said, that they are basically consultants who help people implement different software tools. So it's a lot of like technical content.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe give an example of like a couple of the topics we've done, or
Well, a lot of the topics are really focused on like the new tools that are coming out and the updates that happen to these tools because a lot of RedK's work in general is becoming this consultant, so helping different companies do this whole digital transformation, and they offer this like very boutique and niche service. So a lot of it is like updates on the new technologies, but also I remember a lot of the work that I did was about customer service tools and like how basically how like the tools and technologies are coming out to like streamline customer service and how there's tools now that basically like if someone calls the company, it automatically comes up with their profile, all the information, their whole client history comes up on the screen. And a lot of so we do a lot of the thought leadership based on a lot of research and like most of a lot of recent research and publications about these topics. So a lot of it, like in this case, in the work I was doing with customer service and the different tools that can help streamline that and give your client like the best experience possible. A lot of that was based on like different sociological studies and different research that was basically like saying how like little things like this, like streamlining your processes can make your client happier and make them, buy more, have higher sales, etc. So it's kind of showing those trends. So it's definitely very specific to the topic for sure.
So yeah, talking about like where to like source expertise from.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think both with RedK and with other clients, like obviously a huge source of knowledge is like internal knowledge, and I think that like that's oftentimes like the best place
Mm-hmm.
to start because like when you're creating thought leadership content, you really want to highlight like the internal expertise of the company
Mm-hmm.
to show obviously to show your authority and knowledge on about what you do at the
Mm-hmm.
company. So a lot of times, like a great tool for us as content marketers is to conduct interviews. And like I was
Mm-hmm.
saying before, and my background as a journalist, I know how important it is to an interview is really unique because it gives you it's a primary source of
Mm-hmm.
content. It's like it's going to be different than anything else that's out there on the internet for the most part. I mean, you're getting a unique perspective from an individual person that's going to give you the chance to create something really like
Mm-hmm.
different rather than only researching and rewriting something that's already out there.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, when we're getting to know a new topic, a lot of it is also based on secondary research, as it is in journalism as well. Like you need to read everything else that's out there and put your own take on it. And
Right.
obviously that can also inform the questions that you ask during your interview. Then another like source that we sometimes use is featuring external experts. I think internal experts is like preferable, but it can also be interesting. Also, it can create synergies for the company as well. Just having these opportunities to interact with other experts in the field. It could be a chance for like cross promotion with
Mm-hmm.
other organizations, appearing on their social media and things like that. So that's also interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then one thing that I know we've done with RedK and with other clients also is like repurposing from other firsthand sources, such as like webinars. And I know maybe you can give an example, Kyler, of like webinar,
Well,
how we've done that with RedK.
yeah, well, I was going to say like for this specific client, so speaking from my own experience, we kind of done all the different methods that you just mentioned. So like one of them was like we do this weekly blog post for them. And it's from the CMO's point of view. And I think he invested a lot of time with me, for example, when I started on the account to like train me, to give me his perspective on the topic, to really understand. So that way, and obviously we did a lot of touch base with him, but we were able to take his, like throughout the collaboration, it wasn't just one training session, it was many throughout the different, many years that we've worked with him. And that has given me a lot of insight into like how he wants to present his ideas and kind of I guess like that really helps me understand his purpose and what he wanted to get out of the content. So like working alongside with him, but then we also within the organization itself, we've done the different like employee interviews to kind of highlight the different members of their team and how they're so essential to like the different processes they have and the services they offer. So we were able to do an interview with them and record the interview, come up with the questions that we wanted, and like you said, great firsthand, first person, like firsthand, like quotes we could use, and it really helps when you have that because when you have the interview recorded, then you can use it in many different ways. And then also we did different webinars. So a lot of the times they have done webinars, both in English and Spanish, with their different clients. So like it'd be, a member of the RedK team interviewing one of their clients to talk about, how RedK helps them with their digital transformation within the organization. And with that, we were also able to go to the webinar, ask our own questions as well. So like kind of putting our journalistic hats on in this case. And then we also would have the recording of it. So it was all different like factors. And we were able to kind of, go into the webinar knowing what kind of information we wanted to get and then curate the questions that we wanted to ask them as well. So I think like interviewing is probably one of the easiest ways in terms of like to produce this type of content because it allows the expert to really showcase their skills in a comfortable and natural environment.
Yeah, and in the course of the interview, you often get enough content to create like so many ideas come out that you can create several pieces of content around that.
Right.
So, yeah. I know like one challenge that a lot of companies face is like, how do you get people to make time for doing these interviews?
Yeah.
First of all, sometimes there's we talked about how it's like asking them to do an interview is easier than like asking them to write something because like that's like really a big ask. I think when it's outside someone outside your department, I know like in some cases marketers try to get their colleagues to produce a piece of content for them, and I feel like that's almost an impossible ask because like
really
that really requires like a lot of organization and skills that they might not have. But the interview is an easier ask, but still it's something that has to fit into their workflow and has to be prioritized. And so it's like, how do you convince your colleagues to make time for doing this kind of an interview? Or if you're working with the agency, to do the interview with the agency. And I think like, first of all, like there has to be like a process created around this, and there has to be buy-in, obviously, and like it has to be a company-wide priority, has to be in line with the goals of the organization, and people have to understand why it's important.
Right.
But I think also like if you like have a really clear schedule and deadlines, and okay, this is your date for the interview, it's on the calendar, you have to be there. Like, I mean, it's key for getting the interviews done. Of course, people might cancel because something else, the client meeting comes up or whatever, but
of course.
But yeah, being as organized as possible and being serious about it and being kind of strict about the deadlines, I think really helps to get people on board with it. Also, like you said, I know like a lot of times we think like thought leadership has to come from the C-suite, and sometimes, and they're generally like the hardest people to pin down for an interview. And I think that it's also worthwhile, obviously, to interview people. Like there's lots of other people on the team with knowledge, not only the executives, and maybe even more like specialized knowledge. So yeah, it can make sense to interview people at other levels of the company. But of course, like you said, with RedK and with other clients, we do ghostwriting on behalf of senior executives. And I mean, basically you can interview someone at a lower level, use their insights to, even if you're writing like ghostwriting for an executive, you can create that piece of content based on other interviews you've done and then get approval from the executive, which is obviously oftentimes much faster, easier approval process than doing an hour-long interview with them. So.
And I think it's like, to go off of it, what you're saying in terms of like, not everyone has the skills to write. Like if someone asked you or me to write something, I'm sure we could, because that's our field and that's what we've done. And, our career started in that, with that passion. But I think like a software engineer, for example, is not going to be the one that's, the top writer in your department, for example. So I think it's the whole concept behind the interview is like like you said, like being prepared, I think it's a really big part of it because you really want the person to feel comfortable because not everyone's going to be a great public speaker or feel comfortable, in an interview. So a lot of it's kind of make them feel comfortable, make them, have a good environment. So one thing you can do is prepare the questions in advance and share the questions with the interviewee before. So that way they have an idea more or less of what to prepare or what the conversation is going to be about. So they're more at ease. And I also think another thing that I've done and I've seen like good results is like making sure you stay on time in the schedule. So you say like it's going to be 30-minute interview, make sure it's 30 minutes because people have busy schedules and they're carving out time for you. So I think being concise and being to the point and knowing what you're going to get out of the interview is important as well. So yeah, I think like making sure the interviewee is comfortable with the topic and feels comfortable with you as like the interviewer is super important. But I guess like the question comes up too now is like kind of who should be conducting these interviews because a lot of times I think in my experience I was entrusted as like even though we're an agency I was the one that was reaching out to the different employees or thought leaders people that we needed to reach out to on behalf of the agency, which it's because I think the clients that we work with really do trust us for that. But I don't know, in your opinion, Shaheen, and then we conducted the interviews as well. So it was kind of like the third party was doing everything. So in your opinion, who should be conducting the interviews? Should it be someone within the organization? Do we trust people from outside?
Yeah.
What do you
And
think?
I think it can be either one, of course, but like I think like the person actually doing the interview needs to be someone. I mean, I think they need to be someone who has experience with interviewing. So someone with a background in journalism or who just has done interviewing as part of their job as a content marketer, but
Right.
who's also a writer. Like I think ideally it's the same person who does the interview who's later going to like turn it into the content. Although it
Right.
doesn't have to be.
For sure.
like you said, in there, like we can also repurpose. You can have like a video interview that's done by someone and then a writer later takes that and turns it into their content. But of course, if you're the one who's going to be creating the content, you are going to target the questions in a way that's going to like lead to the answers that you need for the content that you're creating. It's easier than repurposing something that's been created by someone else. Then you're limited to what they've asked in the interview.
That's for sure.
And then well, in the way we work at Vera, I mean, we have like project managers and then we have, writers and content creators. So it's oftentimes like the coordination side of it might be done by the project manager, actually like setting up the interviews, but then they're usually conducted by a writer on our team. So, and we have different types of writers who are specialized in different types of projects. So of course we work with the ones who are more journalistic, have more journalistic experience to do this type of work.
Of course. I think that's important too, like that, like how to ask questions and stuff like that. And we mentioned too, like I mentioned, at least like preparing questions is super important. So like, sharing the questions with the interviewee to be well prepared for an interview. But like, I don't know if you have any other best practices, Shaheen, in mind when you have done interviews before as a former journalist as well. What are some good tips and tricks?
I mean, I think it's really important to be prepared for the interview, but at the same time, you do have to leave it somewhat open-ended. Like you can't just stick to the set list of questions or else it's especially like, I mean, if you do that, it's like if you send people the person you're interviewing the questions in advance, they're going to like think about it and come with their set answers. And it's almost the same as if you just sent them a questionnaire. Whereas like, I think the advantage of doing an in-person interview is that things have like conversation leads to more interesting topics and things come up off the cuff. So like, so I think it's really important to like listen and adapt because actually the questions that you can come up with as a writer who's not really experienced in the topic are probably not going to be as interesting as the topics that the expert themselves would come up with on their own. So it's really, interviewing is all about listening and just kind of, I would say prepare a few questions so they know more or less in line what to expect, but leave a lot of time open for open conversation and letting them lead the conversation and them choosing the topics.
Yeah. I think that's a good thing to keep in mind too, is like breaking the ice at the beginning as well. And just like be a personable person as an interviewer and, just ask them some questions about how their day is going or something like that. Like you really want to make them feel comfortable. And I think that's a really good way of doing it as well. And to like kind of go off of the question idea. When we used to do a lot of interviews for this podcast, we would interview a lot of different marketing experts here throughout Europe. A lot of times I'd find like people being like, do I have to answer all the questions like 100% that way? Or people would come in with all the answers prepared, which I totally understood in many cases because English wasn't people's first language as well. And I totally get that. And like with my work with Redcape, for example, I've had to do interviews in Spanish, and that's obviously like an extra step for like, or extra factor you have to keep in mind that you're speaking in your second language. But I always would tell the people I was interviewing, like, yes, you can use that, but like I prefer not for you to like, stick so much to your script, or like I want you to feel comfortable and just have a conversation with me, or like pretend that we're like at a coffee shop and just very relaxed, because I think the best content comes out of those like sporadic or spontaneous conversations that like come out of the different questions. And that's where you get like the really interesting content that maybe you weren't even expecting to talk about. So I think it's like if you make the person feel comfortable, then they're going to be like their true self, and they're going to share a lot of and feel comfortable enough to share with you different insights.
Absolutely. Yeah. And actually, when I did work in newspapers, I mean, the best practice in professional journalism is to not send the questions in advance. It's actually kind of like a faux pas.
Ooh.
Yeah. Like, I mean, in my training as a journalist, it was always like told that you should, like, the best practice is to, you prepare, you come into the conversation with your questions ready, but
Right.
you don't send it to them in advance, or otherwise they're not going to be spontaneous, and they're not going to be as forthcoming in the meeting. They're going to be overly prepared, and they're only going to say, especially in journalism too, when you're talking more about, like, you're trying to get people to say things they might not want to say.
I was going to say, like, in a juicy case.
So you want to catch them like a little off guard.
Right.
I don't think that's as much the case when you're doing like corporate copywriting.
No.
But I think like, but yeah, in journalism, you want to keep it really natural. You want to get like the super interesting tidbits that like maybe they wouldn't have said if they were too prepared, But I think like with corporate copywriting and blog post writing and so forth, I think it's more like, I like to use like a middle ground. It's like, send them a few questions in advance so they know the line of what you're going to be asking, but don't send them everything.
Right.
So, and keep it really simple, because they can get overwhelmed if you send them like 20 questions. They're like, oh my God. And that's like way too much for them to have to prepare as well. And you probably won't get the chance to ask all 20 questions anyway. So I say like max 5 questions.
Yeah.
And so that it gives, and like 5 very broad questions that gives them the idea of what you want to talk about. But then on your notes have like more specific questions that you plan to ask them, but don't tell them about that in advance.
Exactly. As long as you know, exactly what questions you want to ask and what you want to get out of the interview, you can guide the person in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think to wrap up the interview, this is an interview we're doing right now, so it's kind of fun, more of a conversation, like you say, but that's how it should be, very relaxed and just like you're having a conversation with a friend. So I guess. And now we talked about like the best practices. I mean, we just talked about how like the best practices for interviewing and what are some tips and tricks. But in terms of like creating the great interview-based content, what do you think are some like best practices or things that you need to keep in mind when you're doing that kind of work in order to like really hit the bar?
Yeah. Well, I guess it's like a few tips. I think we've touched on a lot of things already, but one is like I think when it comes to content marketing, like it's really important to, whenever you can, record the interviews, because it opens up a lot of possibilities for repurposing. And if you like record the audio and the video, you can potentially use it for multimedia content as well. And you can also use transcription software to get everything into text format. And actually, what we do with this podcast and with a lot of other things is use like to keep a database of all the transcribed interviews, so that when we need to reference, like when we're looking for content, when we have a topic that comes up again, we can search back in our old interviews and see if we've interviewed someone about that in the past. And that is a really great way to like have to not have to reinvent the wheel every time, basically. And sometimes you have like great content that that came out of an interview for a piece of content you were creating at the time, but that you didn't use in that particular piece. So then you can find it by searching back, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like
For
searching through
example,
it. Mm-hmm.
for English, it works really well. This Otter.ai, I think it's called. And it actually has the search feature within the software, so that's really cool. And I know for other languages we use different software, but I think that's super useful to have to create like a database,
especially like to see the words and be able to like work with them as well. I think it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And then one thing as well I wanted to say in general is like when you're like going back to the topic about how it takes time basically to become a subject matter to learn a topic. Like we were talking about how writers like oftentimes it's necessary to work with writers who aren't necessarily experts in the topic yet. But I think that like if you like, it requires investment in them in the beginning and patience and time to get to the point where they're going to be consistently creating great content on the topics that you need. And that's just important to like have that expectation from the beginning that it's not going to be instant, but once you do create all the processes, you have the right team and and everything in place to create the content, like it's going to get easier and easier over time.
Exactly. And I think with like RedK, that was the case with me. And like, I think the client has been very understanding of that with us and patient. I think he came in and I had no idea about anything. And he started from the basics with me and like would check in and like, tell me this is like, maybe like you can say it this way because this is X, Y, and Z and like stuff I don't know about. So like, I think it's, it takes time, like any good habit or any good skill, it takes time to learn. So it's really important. I think that like both sides, whether it's the client that you're writing for and the client towards the writer themselves, that like you're patient a bit and just try, it's kind of like the growing pains of any relationship that you want to like, get through the tough stuff at first, and then it kind of grows and evolves, and then you don't have to worry so much about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it takes time to like build your writing team, but once you have them in place, then it's smooth sailing.
And once you have like good like processes in place as well, and even if you're writing on the same type of content for a same client, different topics, obviously you could do like a how-to guide, for example, and make the process very efficient, so that way you can train a lot of people at the same time. So kind of like knowledge transfer that happens from like the client. In my case, it was to me, and then I was able to train my other team members on the topic. So yeah, it's definitely, if you train one person, not just they're not going to keep all the knowledge. It's good to share it as well.
Yeah, exactly. That has to be documented. And like we've talked about in other episodes, like that's a huge part of what we do at Vera is like for every client. I mean, we really invest in the long-term relationship with our clients and being their content partner in the long term.
Of course.
And what we do for every client project is create like a style guide and term base so that we have reference points for every new writer who works on the project. So like it's not just like training each individual writer, but creating all those materials so that every time you do have a new writer come in, that you have that they start at the same baseline as the rest of the team.
And record those, like for example, like if a client's giving you like a workshop on the topic, like the initial, record that, so that way you have the video and you can also share that as a resource for your writers as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
I think like the theme of this whole interview today has been like record and transcribe everything so that you can use
keep
that.
records.
Keep records. Yeah, keep your receipts of everything. But that does help because that way you can use the written and sort like hard material for an article or whatever content you're working on, and then in the future you always can circle back to it as well. So with that being said, I think we've covered all the main topics that are associated with, thought leadership copywriting for corporate publications. So I want to thank you, Shaheen, as always, for your insight on this topic. And I want to thank everybody for listening in. For more perspectives on global content marketing, definitely check out veracontent.com/mix. And if you'd like to get in touch with us, or if you have any interesting topic for an upcoming interview, feel free to reach out to us at mix@veracontent.com, and keep tuning to the podcast for more perspectives on topics related to global content creation. Thanks,
everybody.
Yeah, see you next time. Bye. Thanks, Shaheen.